pray, Almighty God, as we commemorate those who have gone before us this day in search of peace for our country. Bless them, Lord, and bless us who follow them, that we may always live in peace and in your care. Amen.
Marcus Howard is an independent filmmaker documenting many of the 1916 relative stories on his YouTube channel, Easter Rising Stories. I'm very happy to say that he's here with us today to speak to us about the War of Independence and Bloody Sunday.
How you doing, everybody? And thanks so much for having me here, and thanks for coming out today. It really, really means a lot. Dick McKee is a man who's been forgotten by so many. Even his centenary, in a way, was stolen last year because of COVID. So in a way, we're kind of stealing it back by having this event. It's because you've come out that he's remembered. So this is the 101st anniversary of Dick McKee's death. I've always been of the belief that the 101st historical anniversary is more important than the 100th. Everyone comes out for a centenary event, but what happens after a centenary? Are we supposed to forget about it, put it neatly away? Or what are we to remember, and how are we to remember it? History needs to be remembered, warts and all. You're the keepers of that flame, and it is up to you to pass it on to the next generation. And you should be so proud to have this memorial here. Dick McKee was a young printer born on the Phibsborough Road in 1893 and living in Finglas Bridge with his mother and younger brother after the death of his father. It was Dick McKee who had planned some of the most significant events of the War of Independence, and we are not going to forget what he did. Dick McKee is getting remembered today for his life and how, up to the point of his death, he raged against the dying of the light. It was the counterintelligence of everyday people, from barmen, shopkeepers, chefs, newsagents, prostitutes, dockers, hospital staff, who all helped McKee and the IRA deliver one hell of a punch to the British Empire. Brigadier Dick McKee's organisational skills were incredible. It is a testament to his success at operating in the shadows. The British intelligence had very limited knowledge who he was. This was even after he served time in Knutsford and the Frongach jail after taking part in the 1916 Rising and being taken into custody in 1918, 1919 and fatally in 1920. A book that gives a fascinating account about Dick McKee is Derek Molyneux and Darren Kelly's Killing at its Very Extreme book, which has helped to right many historical wrongs and have looked at the War of Independence in forensic detail in Dublin. Brigadier Dick McKee wasn't afraid to lead from the front. It was Dick McKee, a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, who in March 1918 was unanimously elected as Brigadier of the Dublin Brigade, while also having the title of GHQ Director of Training. McKee was essential to the reconstruction of the Dublin Brigade after 1916. On the 17th of March 1918, Dick McKee and his fellow volunteer officers were arrested for illegal drilling in Beaumont. The following morning saw him and others imprisoned. McKee and others were soon transferred to Dundalk Jail, which is where I'm from, my hometown. He was there with Terence McSweeney, Frank Henderson, Ernest Blythe, Sean Tracy, Dermot Lynch, Frank Thornton, and quickly established another Republican University of Revolution there, under the pretense of Irish language classes. McKee discussed bomb making, strategies, and tactics. If ever there was a need to learn Irish, then this was it. McKee was particularly influenced by a German officer called von Spahn, who had written The Art of Command, which looked at infantry tactics and the independence of command in the field, where each unit knew the general order, but that they had flexibility in the field to adapt to a changing situation. This had made a big impression on Dick McKee in terms of conducting the War of Independence, and he would put these tactics into practice. Upon release and back on the streets of Dublin, it was McKee, again, who helped reorganise the Dublin Brigade command structure when it looked like the British would force conscription for Irishmen into World War I. In his position as GHQ Director of Training, McKee held officer training camps, drew up plans for street fighting and for the defence of Dublin City in the event of a direct British attack, and he established a grenade and bomb factory at 198 Parnell Street in the heart of Dublin City. Brigadier Dick McKee was also a skilled propagandist. As a result of his experience as a printer and compositor working for Gill, it was in Dick McKee's premises that An Tuglock newspaper was printed in number 30 Upper Liffey Street on his linotype machine. This allowed for the mass printing and distribution of the newspaper for Irish volunteer groups around the country, which helped to centralise organisation in terms of units, training, command structures and tactics. In March 1919, it was Dick McKee who had given his full support to the idea of a raid by Tom Byrne and others to rob weapons and ammunition from Collinstown Aerodrome, Dublin Airport, as you know. McKee made sure all Dublin battalions would engage in the attack, and he got deeply involved in its planning. McKee helped coordinate the daring raid. He discussed, and this is incredible, with the participants how to subdue the guard dogs with morphine, how the attack would be carried out with sledgehammers and knuckle dusters. McKee had also helped to arrange the vehicles to escape with the weapons haul. McKee also arranged that every man would have an ID number and not to use any names. McKee also emphasised that although everyone had a particular task, independence of action was authorised. So you can see with the Von Spawn book how much of an impact that had. Every approach route was identified as well as hotspots where there could be trouble. McKee instructed the 25 who took part in the raid for a bloodless victory. Because of this meticulous planning, the raid was a success and it had no casualties. Dick McKee and Michael Lynch waited in Rutland Square to make sure all the weapons, ammunition and other material was unloaded and the men's mission accounted for. McKee had the Dublin Brigade carry out raids for arms, ammunition and gelignite regularly throughout the next year. He led raids at Ashtown, organising attacks on the BNI steam packet sheds and the Great Northern Railway over the next 12 months. He also ordered attacks on Crumlin Police Barracks and Ballybrack Barracks, which went horrifically wrong as 2 volunteers died of horrific burns from the petrol, but McKee ensured volunteers used paraffin in future. Brigadier Dick McKee was ruthless enough to take the fight to the British Empire in a way that would wound them. By April 1919, Republicans were being monitored all over Dublin. In response to Republicans being spied on and followed, Dick McKee made sure that 4 men would shadow G Division detectives. Dick McKee, Michael Collins and Richard Mulcahy made sure detectives were given friendly warnings to cease their political work. Detectives who ignored these friendly warnings were sent letters to their homes that they would be killed if they continued. In July 1919, a conference between Dick McKee, Michael Collins and Richard Mulcahy concluded that it was now time to wipe out the G Division detectives of the Dublin Metropolitan Police Force. Volunteers were increasingly feeling the heat by the G Division detectives. A message would be sent, or would need to be sent, to dissuade would-be informers, as well as to the detectives themselves to back off. McKee is quoted as saying, "They've been warned already to stop or receive a bullet. We have to proceed at once." They couldn't back down now, the stakes were too high. They had to show that they meant business. Brigadier Dick McKee was not afraid also to challenge authority if it got in his way. McKee knew that Cathal Brugha, who was then the Minister of Defence in the Dáil, would be furious with the action to kill detectives. But McKee himself has stated, "Whether Brugha approves or not, we are going ahead. I am making arrangements to have Detective Smith shot. At the next meeting of GHQ, Cathal will ask under whose orders was Smith shot, and I will say, by mine." Detective Patrick, nicknamed the Dog Smith due to his dogged determination, had been ignoring the warnings given to them. McKee knew he could possibly be suspended by Brugha or court-martialed for exceeding those orders. It was McKee who sought out Mick MacDonald to put together a list of men who would carry out this killing. It was Dick McKee again who asked the men if they had any objection to shooting enemy agents. Detective Smith would be shot on the 30th of July, dying sometime later. By September 1919, a second detective, Daniel Hoey, was shot after a raid in Harcourt Street, which put Michael Collins in danger. Dick McKee met with Collins, Mulcahy and Brugha at GHQ. They decided the full-time squad would be needed. It was McKee who would help recruit Paddy Daly and Joe Leonard and Ben Barrett. It was Dick McKee who sent Mick MacDonald to travel to London with George Fitzgerald and Liam Tobin to assess the possibility of wiping out the British cabinet, as well as hostile newspaper editors, although the operation never went ahead. But other plans were in place. Many of you know about the famous attack on the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, Lord French, in December 1919. What you may not know is that in November 1919, McKee had instructed Mick MacDonald to assassinate Lord French during a parade to commemorate Armistice Day in front of the Bank of Ireland on College Green. It was called off at the last minute. McKee himself was arrested with others at 76 Harcourt Street, only just having disposed the papers that would have seen him hung. There is a rare picture of him in his long leather jacket smiling in the lurry with those who had arrested him. That's why I wore the leather jacket today. In June 1920, McKee was everywhere. From launching successful arms and ammunition raids at the King's Inn buildings, which operated as a legal records office for the British government. But not only in Dublin. McKee and Clancy found themselves up in Derry. after the nationalist community had found themselves under fire from loyalist snipers. They managed to get past the cordon into St. Columba's College and helped coordinate its defence. A Lewis gun was supplied as well as ammunition given. McKee was then back down in Dublin again in July and was now liaising with James O'Donovan, who was experimenting with gel ignite and grenade manufacturing to continue the fight. McKee organised all the Dublin battalion adjutants to this part really impressed me, that he organised all the Dublin battalion adjutants to compile all battalion members' names, addresses and what weapons and ammunition they had at their disposal in code. McKee had a secret office in Mater Hospital, where he kept many of the names of those, so when there was a raid around Dublin, he could cycle to the hospital and cross-reference if there were volunteers arrested. He would be able to assess what weapons and ammunition may have been taken as well, so he knew how well supplied they were around the city. His organisational skills were absolutely incredible. Brigadier Dick McKee did everything he could not to leave anyone behind. After the daring escape by Dan Breen and Sean Tracy at Fernside, McKee sprung into action. Dan Breen was heavily wounded and delirious at number 77 Botanic Avenue while being hunted by a large British force. McKee was called for at the Brennan and Walsh Outfitters at Sackville Street. It was Dick McKee again who ordered Joe Vyse, Maurice Brennan and Tom Kelly to rescue Dan Breen. He would not be forgotten. McKee arranged for Breen's admission to Geraldine O'Donnell's private nursing home at 62 Eccles Street. But as the car was arriving there, McKee and Mick MacDonald warned the car occupants that the hospital was being searched and that they would have to hide Breen. Breen was driven there the next morning to Eccles Street. In the Republican Outfitters on Talbot Street, Dick McKee was discussing with Patrick Clancy, Frank and Leo Henderson, Liam Tobin, Frank Thornton and Tom Cullen the idea to attack the British Army funeral procession, which would have General Tudor and Hamar Greenwood attending along Dublin Quays. The plan was to assassinate Tudor and Greenwood while they were at the funeral, but it was called off when it was realised that neither Greenwood or Tudor would be in the procession. Sean Tracy had arrived late to the Republican Outfitters shop. Two lorries from Dublin Castle approached the shop. McKee tried to warn them that they were coming. Most who were there slipped out the back, but Sean Tracy mounted McKee's bike to escape, which was too big for him. McKee was very tall. And Sean Tracy was shot. But Tracy had killed Lieutenant Price and injured another before he went down. In October 1920, Dick McKee arranges for an affidavit to be given by the imprisoned Kevin Barry, detailing torture and heavy-handed tactics by the British who held him. Kevin Barry's death sentence had, however, been confirmed. McKee had ordered the attack by the IRA that ended up getting Kevin Barry arrested the month before. But before Kevin Barry's execution, Jack Plunkett had been ordered by Dick McKee to prepare an explosive mine which would be used to blow up a large section of Mountjoy Prison's wall. A plan was put in place which would be led by Dick McKee, where Tom Ennis, Tom Keogh, Frank Flood and others would storm in and rescue him. The plan was called off as it was feared Barry would be killed while attempting to escape, as well as endangering many civilians. Also, Kevin Barry's mother was holding out for a last-minute reprieve, but it never came. In November 1920, the IRA were on the back foot. The British had believed the IRA to be defeated. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had famously pronounced, "We have murder by the throat." Well, Dick McKee would make sure Lloyd George would be eating those words soon enough. McKee stressed to his comrades they would have to strike hard or accept defeat. If you don't hit them first, they are going to hit you. As for Bloody Sunday, it was Dick McKee, Sean Russell and Frank Thornton who tactically organised Bloody Sunday by putting all the files together for their targets. On the 17th of November, Dick McKee received a letter from Michael Collins saying that Lieutenant G, aka Lily Mernon, who was the female spy in Dublin Castle, had suggested November 21st as the date to strike. It was Dick McKee and Sean Russell who chose the men who were going to take part in the shootings on Bloody Sunday. It was McKee and Russell who planned the buildings that were going to be used. It was McKee and Sean Russell who organised the boats to ferry the IRA units across the River Liffey after their hit. McKee was also involved in setting up of first aid stations, the transportation arrangements for wounded, where car drivers were to be located, which common man members were to rendezvous with the volunteers so they could dispose of the weapons after their hit. The logistics of this is absolutely incredible, and the most shocking thing for British intelligence is they had no idea this operation was going to take place. The event of Bloody Sunday was perhaps the most significant in terms of the War of Independence. Now, there are two women who were unsung heroes, whose actions were small, but whose impact, I think, had far-reaching consequences in the last days of Dick McKee and Patrick Clancy. McKee and Clancy had left Vaughan's Hotel on the eve of Bloody Sunday after GHG meeting and cycled back to Lower Gloucester Street, now known as Sean McDermott Street, to the home of Sean Fitzpatrick. They were followed by a spy for the British known as John Shankers Ryan. Ryan had left a marker on the door, and so the British knew which house to raid. But what Ryan didn't know was that the head nun in the convent across the street was watching him and tipped off Sean Fitzpatrick. So McKee and Clancy began burning papers, which included the list of those who were to be assassinated by the IRA the following day. The head nun was an unsung hero. Another unsung hero is a young woman called Florrie Fitzpatrick, the adopted sister of Sean Fitzpatrick, where McKee and Clancy were staying on the eve of Bloody Sunday. She had another small part in one sense, but it played a huge part. She told the auxiliaries who were trying to break down the back entrance of the house, "Stop, I'm trying to get some clothes on, give me time to dress." This was a ruse, but it bought time for McKee and Clancy to burn the papers with the assassination targets in the fireplace before they were arrested. Like, think of the consequences regarding Irish history and what we know of Irish history and the War of Independence if the papers with the Bloody Sunday targets were found the evening before the strike. Florrie Fitzpatrick was an unsung hero. Dick McKee was now in Dublin Castle with Peadar Clancy and others. Conor Clune, who'd been up on civilian business, had no part to play in Bloody Sunday and was brought to Dublin Castle. It would be catastrophic if they talked, as it would not only alert the intended targets but also put the men and counterintelligence agents at risk. Some Irish volunteer prisoners were soon moved from Dublin Castle. McKee had stopped Sean Fitzpatrick though before he left and movingly said, "If you get through, Fitz, give my love to my mother, my sisters and my brother." Another volunteer, Patrick Young, has recounted McKee giving him his hat, telling him, "I don't think I want this anymore." He knew he was going to die. After news came after 9 a.m. Sunday of target after target being successfully assassinated by the IRA across Dublin City, they had made a mockery of British intelligence and auxiliaries. And those auxiliaries had now lost many of their comrades. They were angry. The auxiliaries, in a drunken rage, helped exact revenge with blackened hands and RIC on the civilian population in Croke Park. And they were certainly now going to make those held as prisoner in Dublin Castle pay. Savage beatings were dished out as they were severely interrogated by Captains Hardy and Captain King that evening. McKee and Clancy were tied to wooden chairs and beaten. Buckets of water were thrown over them to revive them, only to be beaten again. Mock executions where they pulled the gun up to their head, were placed against their head so they would talk, but they didn't talk. McKee, Clancy and Clune continued to be savagely beaten in Dublin Castle. A line of drunken auxiliary cadets pointed their rifles and revolvers at them. Michael Lynch's witness statement has said how McKee gave them a cold stare and shouted back, "Go on, do your worst." He raged against the dying of the light. Towards sunrise on the Monday morning, McKee, Clancy and Clune were brought into a narrow courtyard and told to stand against the wall. They were shot, McKee receiving 2 bullets, Peadar Clancy receiving 5 bullets, and Conor Clune receiving 7 bullets. The walls were hosed clean and propaganda photos emerged attributing their deaths as being shot while trying to escape. This wasn't the case. Michael Lynch, an IRA Brigade commander, stated about seeing McKee's body, "I saw Dick McKee's body afterwards, and it was almost unrecognisable. He had evidently been tortured before being shot. They must have beaten Dick to a pulp." They're his words. Collins had believed it was all over when he heard McKee and Clancy were killed, which shows the greatness of Dick McKee itself. Collins attended the funeral in the Pro-Cathedral against the wishes of his compatriots, who saw this action as suicidal. They were determined to risk it all to see that McKee and Clancy were buried in their volunteer uniforms. Michael Collins at one point carrying the tricolour coffins to their hearses. The wreath Collins left had read, "In memory of 2 great friends, Dick and Peadar, 2 of Ireland's best soldiers, Michael O'Callaghan." Many people today look up to Michael Collins' actions during the War of Independence, yet the person who Michael Collins looked up to was Dick McKee. McKee had said to Harry Colley, the 2nd Battalion Adjutant of the IRA, that if he was captured, there would be others to take his place, and there were. But if it wasn't for McKee, there would be no boots on the ground in the first place. Some of those who wore those boots were the active service units and the newly formed IRA 6th Battalion, who set South Dublin ablaze during the spring of 1921. And both of those units were spawned by McKee shortly before he'd been killed. Everybody here, and I know many of you here, it's so important that you come out. Whatever you do, please do everything you can to pass down Dick McKee's story to the next generation. It really needs to be told. Ireland needs its heroes to get us through the bad times, so we can all have a better day in the future. And so we can take courage from a great man who in his 27 years did everything he could to rage against the dying of the light in order to give us all a better day. Thank you.
People may pass by this place tomorrow morning when we're all gone and wonder why the flowers are here. And they just see flowers as a tribute. But they mean much more than that. They represent gratitude, thanks, bravery, all the things that have gone before us in the young people's lives who, in the early days of our country being formed, our state being formed, gave their lives for us. And so by way of a prayer, I'll read a poem. It's called Remembering an Age in Ireland. If we remember what others have done for us and are grateful by reciting a prayer, then what they have done we shall always remember and gather in this place every year. Soldiers were they, both young and old, and there is many a house where their stories are still told. For a tuft of green grass or the bank of a river, they defended till their death as they tried to deliver something so beautiful, but it cost them their lives. And yet the intruder was the one so unwise. This land is small, but it belongs to no foreign power. It has been fought for and died for, and that work still goes on. And if you listen some evening in a valley somewhere, you may hear voices of lads singing and a lark in the air. And was that the Croppy Boy song? To the intruder it was just an island of weak farmers and peasants, to be ruled by these people, but their kindness unpleasant. But we Irish do not fight now. No, we now just write poems. But we warned all intruders, we will always defend our homes. Amen.
I'd now like to invite the Dublin Lord Mayor, Alison Gilliland, to lay the first speech. I have Finglas Lord Mayor, Linda Emmet and Carmel Byrne. From the Finglas Historical Society, Larry and Rosaline. Can I have Commandant Simon Keegan from the Irish Defence Forces? From Finglas Tidy Towns, Philomena and Francis. I'd now like to invite our public representatives and anybody else who'd like to relay a wreath or a flower to come forward.
Mark,